Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Hustle versus Flow podcast. I am super excited about today's special guest, Dr. Elizabeth Fedrick. Welcome, Liz. How are you doing today?
Hello, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Me too. I'm so happy that you're here as well. So kind of funny, Liz and I really wanted to make this discussion happen, and so much so that we have pressed through against all edges of technology. And I can tell you, if you're watching this on YouTube, Liz had the most beautiful background in her office with this gorgeous bookcase, and I was down in my office, but we are making it work for the sake of technology, and just really excited to get into this. So Liz, I'm going to tell the listeners and viewers a little bit about your background because it is extensive and I'm so excited. So first off, Dr. Elizabeth Fedrick owns her own counseling private practice, Evolve Counseling in Gilbert, Arizona. She's a licensed professional counselor and has her doctoral degree in psychology and a master's degree in professional counseling. Among several other therapeutic modalities, Liz is trained in cognitive behavioral therapy and specializes in anxiety and depression, but also focuses on working with her clients on self-esteem, confidence, motivation, personal development, and combating negative beliefs. So I think that this is just like the perfect pairing because, you and I had a conversation just kind of talking about the synchronicities between this more esoteric mindset kind of work and then really the clinical therapy, which is obviously what you specialize in most. So I know that this is kind of a loaded question, but can you just tell us a little bit, like how has, therapy changed since the beginning of COVID and this entire, world-changing event?
Yeah, that's a great question. The format of it has changed as much as what clients are bringing in has, of course, changed as well. When it all started, my colleagues and I were kind of looking at each other like, what does this mean? Like, what does this mean for our livelihood? What does this mean for the practice? We just opened the practice in June of last year. And so when this all started in March, we weren't barely a year in, and a handful of us had established our caseloads, but a lot had not. And so it was really a lot of fear and anxiety, even for us, of what does this mean? And so it's changed the format of it a lot. So probably 25 to 30% of our clients have gone to teletherapy. And that was definitely a transition for, we dreaded it at first. And for reasons like you and I experienced just
right.
10 minutes ago, like sometimes, whether it's the Wi-Fi, the technology, it makes it really hard sometimes to do the therapeutic process.
Sure.
But it's also shifted what people are coming in for. Definitely just the number of calls and referrals we get, even still, it's been going on for almost, 6 months, and the anxiety around it and the stages of grief and what was lost, whether careers and the end of the school year and now the beginning of a new school year. And so we've been doing a lot of anxiety work since it all started, but also doing really a lot of work on depression as well. It's been tragic for a lot of people.
Yeah, I've been noticing, and I'm sure you could speak to the actual numbers, but I've certainly been noticing an uptick in, suicide attempts and things of that nature. So it's really devastating that it's not just an impact of this illness going around. It's just people who are kind of alone with their thoughts and really just need an entire toolkit. I think you and I kind of called it together, an entire toolkit of ways to cope and really process feelings and anxieties, especially. I mean, I think we had discussed it. Like, I'm not very in depth in clinical therapy, but certainly I have my own ways of like, okay, I need to process this, with homeschooling and everything like that. And hey, me, myself, I was furloughed from my job. So it's like me who thinks I have a fairly good handle on my emotions and my anxieties, I'm still getting a little bit like, okay, deep breaths. And it just, where does that leave people who were really struggling prior to all of this and then are finding their own way, through it, obviously?
Yeah. Yep. And that is a good point. I've had some clients say, kind of in a sometimes a joking manner, but like people who experience high levels of anxiety or depression, they're kind of like, well, world, welcome to what I've been experiencing, like that it's kind of normalized that.
That's such a great perspective, because then you're not feeling so isolated and so alone. I love that. I mean, it certainly makes it so you're just not so on the island by yourself, right?
Well, and that's the biggest takeaway we've tried to give, in therapy, is that everyone is experiencing it. Everyone is experiencing the grief and the anxiety around it. And you're just not alone in that.
Right. Oh, well, so I wanted to say, like, I just recently read an article where, your brain and everything was kind of described in this funny little analogy. Like, your brain is really the hardware and your mind is this software. And that, if we can choose like how we process certain information in different ways and just shifting our core focus, we can start to just work through some of those feelings. And can you walk me through, and I've said, like, I am very green, very as base level as it comes when it comes to clinical therapy, but can you kind of walk us through a little bit of just the brain chemistry and how you help your clients identify what's known as like their beliefs or stories?
Yeah, absolutely. So that analogy, I mean, that has to do with, the brain being the physical substance and the mind being the non-physical.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially the idea that like we can work to shift that software. We can make changes in the programming is the big part of that. And the brain chemistry, I mean, we can look at this from a couple different directions. So how the brain works with developing beliefs, the way that the brain fires is the way that it wires. So the brain is made up of 80 to 100 billion neurons that can all make thousands of connections on their own. So we're talking about a very complex system of thousands of millions of connections. And the way that the brain fires, so the way that those, the neurons fire, they form these, it's the connections that they form. You can think of it like the brain being a forest, okay? And so tons and tons of trees. And when we're clearing neural pathways, you can think of clearing a path in the forest, okay? So kind of like the first time through, maybe we're just taking down the tops of the branches and then taking down more and more and more until eventually it becomes this clear path. And that's how the brain works as well, is it, as things are done repetitively, that makes this connection that much stronger. So this can be to our advantage, but it's also how we develop these core beliefs to begin with. Now, core beliefs, they start developing in infancy. When I talk with clients, they ask that a lot, like, well, where did this come from? How did it form? And it is truly in those, in your very formative, even few months of life, your interactions with your caretakers. When you as an infant are in your most vulnerable state and you are crying and you're expressing a need, the way that your caretaker responds to you sets the foundation for your views about yourself. How important are you? Your caretaker, that sets the stage for how safe other people are. And then your environment sets the stage for how safe the world is as a whole. And so I help people to understand that core beliefs, I mean, those neural pathways, they're being formed before we even, there's nothing we can do about it. It is right away.
That's fascinating. And I love that analogy of the forest, because it is one of those things that I think a lot of us don't even know these core beliefs, why we have them, and certainly surrounding our self-worth and how we take risks or how we look at risks in our life, even about, I'm sure you're aware of this and have discussed with your clients about, our stories around money and what it means to make money or what it means to have a certain job or, the perceived value of an education and things like that. And I think it's funny because if you haven't had anything really traumatic happen in your life, I think it can be really hard to pinpoint where exactly you built these things from. Like certainly if you've had traumatic experiences, those are much more difficult to work through. But I think that a lot of people that can focus on mindset work alone, and I'm not talking about, with the aid of anything like antidepressants, it can be kind of hard. Like, okay, I see that I'm not maybe clinically depressed, but I'm anxious and I don't know what to do with these feelings. And I just think that that's a really great way to make it all inclusive. Like, everybody has these stories. It doesn't, just because you've had something traumatic or haven't, like, you're still going to have your perception of the outside world and how you perceive it, right? I love that. Okay, so
that's exactly it. Oh, sorry, I think we glitched out right there.
Oh, no, you're good.
That's exactly it. If I can just go into a little bit further.
Yes.
A little bit further on that, because you're right. When we work with clients who have experienced what we call covert trauma versus overt, so to your point of these overt experiences being the things that are very easy to identify and define. Mm-hmm. Well, that is horrific in and of itself. Usually we can pinpoint the cause of a lot of the anxiety or the depression or these belief systems. But when the trauma is covert and it's not something, so maybe it's more done through manipulation, maybe it's done through passive aggressive comments, maybe it's never feeling good enough. These are a lot harder for clients to identify. And these are often the clients who come in and will tell us, like, I had a really good childhood. Like, I don't know what's wrong with me. Everything was fine. And then we dig in and it's like, okay, that's great. You had a good childhood and your parents instilled in you that you're never good enough. And so that can get sticky.
Absolutely. And I mean, like I said, I think that that's even more important, because when you can't easily identify what's wrong with me, it can feel isolating. Like, why am I feeling like this? There's no, I have a well-paying job. I have healthy children. And even those who still have their jobs, I know, are experiencing a lot of anxieties. And then, that was kind of one of the things that you and I had discussed, that, like, how do you find this balance between your personal life and, your career? Because now more than ever, I think people are really, really focused on either keeping their jobs or, making sure that they can get a job. I know, for one, like, my husband is like, man, I feel like I am under tremendous amounts of pressure just to keep, the job that I have and maintain some type of, I don't know, security. And it's just like, how would you tell people to balance that? What would be your, advice, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question. My colleague and I just did our most recent YouTube video on that, of the anxiety of still working from home, and exactly what you just described about your husband is what we talked about. Is a lot of people who have maintained their careers have now this underlying fear and anxiety of, okay, I've kept it this far, but what does tomorrow bring? And so we do a lot of normalizing around that yes, that is true. Those fears are valid. But also, that's not within your control. If you wake up tomorrow and your company has decided whatever they've decided, that is not something you can influence or directly control. Yes, of course, your work ethic and everything is going to play a role in that. But if they ultimately decide that, focusing on that today and losing sleep over that today is not going to influence the decision of tomorrow. And so doing a lot of focus on, the productive versus unproductive worry.
Yes.
And if those worries are helpful and they're going to change the outcome of something, great. If the worry is just for the sake of worrying and you're spinning the same thought over and over on loop, that's something that we work to move away from.
I love that. And I think I talk about that a lot because it's something I experience inside myself. I call it like this hamster wheel of when you started talking about the forest and these pathways, and if you continue to take that same path, it's even harder to get off. And it's funny because I've always talked about, how difficult it can be for me to shut my brain off. And I know you and I had this conversation about meditation, where sometimes I just you want to stop those thoughts. You want to stop that worry. You really do want to get to that neutral spot where you're absolutely right. Like, okay, is this productive? No. How do I stop it? And sometimes it's really, really difficult. And it's funny how you and I had this kind of chat about, meditation, and I didn't used to do it. And I can tell now if I don't do it, it's like working out. Like I can tell I've missed a day. And I want you to just share with the listeners what you kind of told me about, like what you share, like almost right off the bat, right, with your clients when you first meet with them.
Yes. Yeah. So going into the brain chemistry of anxiety real quick, like is really important because that has a lot to do with this loop. And so the limbic system, the amygdala is responsible. It's your emotion center. And the amygdala responds to perceived threat. So it responds to whether the threat is real, a car swerving into your lane, or whether the threat is perceived. You haven't received an email back that you've been waiting for. So the amygdala starts freaking you out and puts you into a threat state. And so I help my clients first. It's one of the first things I always explain. I go into a bit more detail, but I explain to them the brain chemistry of anxiety, that the amygdala is the fight, flight, or freeze response, and it gets triggered a lot of times without our knowing, and a lot of times, so the amygdala is designed to, it stores emotional memory. So if you've had something that actually was a threat in the past or that was traumatic for you in the past, the amygdala stores that and stores the sensory experiences of that. And so when you're in a present day situation and something reminds you of that in any way, so maybe it reminds you of rejection or reminds you of abandonment or reminds you that you're not good enough, the amygdala will respond to that and it will go into a threat state. And so the meditation part, and so there's different types of meditation, and what I usually prescribe for my clients is more what I call an inner size. In 2011, there was a study done on mindfulness meditation that it was an 8-week program, and it really, the outcomes indicated that after 8 weeks, the thickness of the hippocampus increased, so the cortical thickness of that, and that the hippocampus is responsible for memory and learning. Okay, so they actually saw a thickening in that area. And they also saw a thickening in areas responsible for emotion regulation, for focus, all of those type of things. At the same time, they also saw a thinning in the amygdala. And so in the cell membranes of that, they saw a thinning, which meaning it's not going to be as reactive. And so they're actually, I mean, there is research to support the effectiveness of meditation. And that, you know, the length of time and the number of days and all of that was specific to that study. What I have my clients do is something I call an inner size. And so while it does contribute to all of that, the idea of it for me is self-discipline of the mind. Okay. And so what I tell my clients is, first of all, when you bring up the word meditation, you usually get
buzzword
stares, rolled eyes, people being like, is it time to go yet? Usually not very into it. I explain to them quickly, like, all I'm asking of you is 60 seconds. And you set a timer for 60 seconds. I tell them they can use a guided one if they want, but really you can set a timer for 60 seconds. And I always suggest, like, do your 60 seconds around brushing your teeth or around going to bed, or if you have a prescription you take at a certain time every morning and have an alarm for that, you know, pick something that you do every day and do it around that.
I love that.
And essentially what they're going to do is, for those 60 seconds, get a quiet, calm place. And as with traditional meditation, they're just going to focus on the sensation of their breath. So I tell them, you know, focus on what does it feel like when the breath comes in and the breath comes out. And that's all you get to focus on for 60 seconds. And they're like, okay. And I'm like, within about 2 seconds, it's going to be what's on your grocery list. It's my husband's pissing me off. My kids are so obnoxious today. I have so much, like, literally within 2 seconds. And so I tell them up front, like, in that 60-second time frame, you will get distracted probably about 30 times. And that is okay. And that is normal. The practice here is that when that comes up in your mind of whatever that is, your mile-long to-do list, the idea is you just acknowledge it. So yeah, that sucks. I have a mile-long to-do list, and back to my breath. And so that is the practice. You acknowledge, you let it float away, and you tell yourself back to your breath. And this becomes very applicable. So when you're driving in the car and you're obsessing, you know, acknowledge it and back to my breath.
Now, and I just want to pause and kind of pick out a few things, because I've said the same thing. And I still struggle with it, even though I've probably had multiple episodes talking about how beneficial meditation can be. And really, in my own life, like not even just like, okay, I feel better in the now. When I make a practice of it, like, I mean, every day for at least 5 days. You're so right. Like the ability to make decisions easier, everything that you kind of described in that particular study, which I didn't even realize, you know, I certainly never read that study, but like the memory and learning, like just your ability to remember facts, or like be able to focus on an audiobook. Like I have always said, always, I have a horrible memory, and that I just like, I can't read books because I get too distracted and I'll start thinking about everything else. And, you know, I don't even know what I'm hearing. But I love that you've given this, like, you know, really, I mean, you're focusing on this brain chemistry, yes, but you're kind of giving us the parts of the brain that we are affecting. And to me, it really brings it out of, I mean, not to say like everything that I talk about is BS, but it's like, if you don't understand the chemistry behind it, like that clinical, the science behind it, it's really, really hard to just jump in, right? Because on surface level, it's just like, okay, I can't. Breathing, whatever. I also think like this simple permission, you know, and okay that you've given people, like your mind will wander. I think I've kind of thought I'm the only person in the world who can't keep their brain focused. You know what I mean? Like I've either been on my phone too much, I've been on social media too much, where I just cannot, I can't not multitask. Does that make sense? Like I think that the biggest hurdle for people to jump is that they think about their to-do list. They think about all the things that they need to, you know, really check off their list even before they go to work. Like, okay, I have to shower, brush my teeth, get myself ready, get the kids ready, maybe make their lunch. And I don't have even, this is sad, but some people, like, I don't even have a minute to calm my mind. And it's almost like our world has become who's busier, right? Well, I have this going on and I got to pick up this kid and this, And I think this quarantine and this entire pandemic has really forced us to do a little more self-reflection. Like you do have time. And if it's worth your sanity, you know, you'll take this 60 seconds. And I've found that even when I, you know, start my day with that, even before I get out of bed, let me tell you, it's hard. It's hard not to immediately check, you know, social media, but those are the days where, you know, cereal could be all over my kitchen floor. And I'm like, okay, we're okay. We're just going to clean it up. You know what I mean? Rather than going into a rage. And you really do have to use tangible circumstances like that, right? Or people just think that they are, well, I'm just busy, right? I don't have a problem. I'm just busy. And it's really not until you try it. And I just, like, you know, scrolling furiously, you know, this amygdala and all of the details that you were talking about. And again, you giving that permission and that, okay, like it is okay. You will think about maybe up to 30 things. And the more that you kind of say, okay, thanks for that thought, we'll come back to that and try to go back to your breath. I mean, I think that's really all you can do. And 60 seconds, I mean, that's pretty good. I try to give myself at least like 5 or 10, but it's also nice to hear that, like, you got to start somewhere, because you're not going to continue a 20-minute routine if you don't have that, right?
Well, and not even start a 20-minute routine is the biggest thing, because the number of people who come back and tell me when, you know, at checking in, how was the exercise this week? Oh, well, I had time to do it twice. Okay, it takes longer than 60 seconds to tie your shoes, probably, or around that amount of time. Like if you had the time, you chose not to do it, and chose not to do it because it's hard. It is hard to not focus on all the novel stimuli surrounding us at all times. And exactly why, like what you're saying, it's that busy mindset, and it's that constantly on the go and multitasking that makes it really hard to try to calm your brain for 60 seconds. But that goes back to the analogy of the forest. The more that we do it, the way the brain fires is the way that it wires. And so the more time that we spend in this basically training state of, I don't have to react to everything. Every stimulus that happens doesn't require a reaction. And so even when you were talking about the cereal on the floor, my close friend in the practice and I, we always, we joke, because my little mantra that I use when I'm getting really stressed is, in this moment, I'm okay. So the cereal on the floor, and I'm like, okay, yeah, this is irritating, this is stressful, but I'm safe, I'm okay, I'm healthy. Like, in this moment, I'm okay. I will survive.
And you know, that's funny. That just kind of brought something up in my head that I think that when we think about doing something for our own health, it's very easy to just push it away, right? Like, I give this analogy of, like, when I was pregnant, I have 3 kids, but when I was pregnant, I worked out every day. I had a really great diet. Like, I prioritized my health because it wasn't my health, right? I had a growing human inside me, and I was really passionate about that. Now I can say, after that baby was born and weaned, you know, not nursing her anymore, I was like, okay, now it's so easy to fall back into it. But just going back on something you said earlier, when you are learning these stories as a child, like, I think about, okay, if I can be if I can make decisions from a better mindset and a calmness, I'm going to react to my kids differently, right? Mm-hmm. And they're going to get that, like, they're feeding off of us. Like, if we're impatient, they're going to go into that kind of fight or flight type of thing. And suddenly it has still something to do with you, but in my eyes, I'm like, shoot, this has nothing even to do with me. Like, I'm outwardly portraying myself to my children, these little sponges who knows, this could be the very thing that kind of triggers their stories, like always being rushed, like out the door, go, go, go. You know what I mean? And I'm just like,
yes.
Crap. And I never really, up until this point, I never really even thought about it that way. But it's like, you've got to, like, clean your own side of the street first before you can help. It's like putting on your safety mask in an airplane. It's like, you got to take care of yourself first before you can outwardly help form these little minds. And especially when we're all at home and dealing with very high emotions. So I know that we talked a lot about that inner size. Is there, like, and you had said, and I know I read in your bio that you have some experience with, probably extensive experience with kids and teens. Like, I have teenage nieces and nephews, and I also have, 3 younger kids. What kinds of coping techniques are you teaching them? Are you teaching them meditation, like, right from the get-go? I'm always curious, like, how soon is too soon to develop these really healthy mindset techniques with your children?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Because really, going back real quick to your point about your energy they're going to feed off of, and that's exactly right. When we do work with parents and we do parent-child relationship work, that's exactly what we talk about. Your child feeds off of your energy, and you are creating your child's narrative in those experiences. And so I know, all of us.
I know, but it's so, like, ugh,
I know.
Good to hear.
Trust me. I tell my son all the time, I will pay for your therapy one day, son. I am a therapist and I will pay for yours, because that it's just inevitable. Like, I'm human. I may have an education that tells me all the right things to do, but at the end of the day, we are humans and humans react. Yeah. And a therapist is not any different. And that's, I talk a lot, not to get it too far off, but I talk a lot about it's not about the rupture, it's about the repair. And so when you have these experiences with your kids and you're high energy and you're yelling, come on, get out the door. Yes, they are going to remember that. But what they're going to remember more is when you get in the car or, they start melting down or whatever, and you go to connect and, like, I am so sorry. I did not mean to stress you out like that. I should not have put that on you. That repair makes all the difference. So anyway, going back.
No,
Sorry.
No, listen, I'd like to stay with this for a second too, because
Okay.
but I think that's so important. And I will tell you, I am very careful. And on this entire podcast, I'm very careful not to offer really any type of parenting advice, because I'm just like, I don't have it figured out, right? I feel like I have fairly happy, healthy kids, but I mean, they have meltdowns. I have a meltdown, and it's just, I think that these little, like, I'm going to say it again, this permission, like knowing, like hearing things like, it's not about the rupture, it's about the repair. That's kind of a game changer for me, because I think, and I know my husband would say the same, you feel such guilt sometimes, like, oh my gosh, like I shouldn't have done that. I should be able to keep my cool. Like, where is my head at? And you just feel this tremendous guilt. I mean, I know I have, like, talk about like, oh, I'm gonna have to pay for my son's therapy someday. But yeah. I just, and I think in women particularly, our mind can go so many weird places, like, oh great, I'm raising a sociopath, and oh my gosh, what are the things, what's he gonna do when he's an adult? But I think that we, just hearing that, I'm kind of like, okay, I can give myself space and kind of give myself some, like, okay, it is okay. You now know what you know, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, I'm sure there are a lot of parents, listening along thinking like, thank God. Okay. Yeah. If there's always a chance to kind of like start again and repair that relationship. So yes. I love that. Okay. So good. Now what would, I know you're about to get into, but what would you suggest and when to start? And like, what do you work with your clients on?
Yeah, great question. So mindfulness activities are usually what we engage kids in. That's not to say there aren't meditations that my son and I, he was probably 5, we would sit on the floor together before he would go to bed and we'd do a meditation. And, how long he can really focus, how long I can really focus. That's neither here nor there. We were practicing being still, and we were practicing not being reactive. And so whatever that looks like, but mindfulness activities are really where we put a lot of our focus. And so that can be something as simple as when you are brushing your teeth, what do the bristles feel like on your gums, and focusing on that. It can be taking the kids into the kitchen and opening different spices and talking about what they smell like. You can do games where you blindfold each other and you put a spice under their nose, or you put a piece of fruit in their hand or something, and they really have to focus on, what is this? It's really bringing it all to the present moment. And so whatever that is, where they have to focus on the sound, the sensory experience essentially is what that's about. We also do, my son and I will do activities like on the way home from somewhere, what's something you've never noticed? And I do this actually with my college students when I teach them about mindfulness. I tell them on their way home that day to try to notice some things that they've never noticed on this same exact drive home they do multiple times a week. And it's really fascinating when they come back, they're like, oh my gosh, like a huge tree on the side of the road, or a huge, whatever the case, that they had never noticed. And so really the mindfulness activities is bringing your awareness to your surroundings and to your present moment. One other activity that we do a lot with our kids, and actually we give to our adults to do as well, is a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 sensory countdown. Have you seen that at all?
No.
So it would be like you stop. So this is especially like a grounding technique. So maybe feeling really anxious, or maybe your child is really dysregulated that day and they're just having a hard time. Maybe there's been lots of meltdowns, or you can just tell they're tired. They're out of it that day. And this activity would be a grounding one. So maybe you sit in the living room and look around. What are 5 things you see? What are 4 things you can touch? 3 things you can smell? 2 things you can hear, and 1 thing you can taste. And in what order you do that, it's completely up to you. But again, it's the present moment.
That is fascinating. And I mean, as I process all this, I know that this is going to land with a lot of people, because kind of going back to the busyness of life, there are so many articles that I will send my husband and be like, okay, read this. I think this is going to solve all of our problems. Or I think we have too much sugar, right? And it's these like quick fixes that everyone is looking for. And so I think oftentimes people will say,
Yeah.
oh, this book or this, this certain 5 to 8 hour commitment of reading or going through something is what helped. And a lot of times you're like, that is not going to help me in this present moment. Like when you said present moment, I was like, yeah, it's the truth, because when you're dealing with it, that's when it's the most anxious and everyone's elevated and heightened and just frustrated. And so it's like, I hadn't ever heard these before. I'm definitely going to put them to practice. I cannot wait. Like just, but it's funny. I never would have thought of these sensory things. And I mean, could you explain that maybe just even a little bit more in depth? Like, is that sending some kind of message to different parts of the brain to just kind of center, or, you know, what exactly is that helping with?
So the prefrontal cortex, the purpose of that is that's our logic, our reasoning, our focus, attention. And so again, when I explain I start with the hindbrain when I explain the whole, which I'm not going to bore your listeners with when I explain this in session though. But I start with the hindbrain, and the point of that, go into the amygdala, which we talked about, and then into the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex being designed to regulate us. And so when we can activate the prefrontal cortex, we can then activate our focus, our attention, and the regulation. And so when a child is dysregulating, that is no different than when you are. Their amygdala has been triggered as well. And so when the amygdala gets triggered, the prefrontal cortex goes offline. A way it could be described is like your child, the car is driving without a driver so the car is going and there's no driver in the seat. Okay. And so the car is just going on its own, out of control, and there's no one controlling or dictating where, how fast, or anything like that. So the idea is we have to get the driver back in the seat. I explain it to parents like so I use it, your listeners won't see this, but if you think about putting your thumb inside your hand, as that's your midbrain, and then folding your fingers over, and that's your prefrontal cortex. And when something triggers your child, imagine those fingers popping off, and we call that your top has been popped. And so now you're just operating on your amygdala. And so the mindfulness activities, we are trying to get the prefrontal cortex back online so that the child is able to regulate, so that they can see things clearly, rationally, logically. And so that is the point of those activities, is it's really helping the child, because being present can help the child to recognize that these are potentially perceived threats, that we know the amygdala responds to a real or a perceived. And so we can help the child get to a place to see, like, you're safe, you're okay, it's not really a threat, and we can fix the issue. I'll let you jump in, but then I have one other technique that we use that kind of ties into this. So if you want to jump in first.
And I was just thinking about this, and kind of going back to how you described being in your current job and being anxious about the things that haven't happened yet, and just worrying about the here and now, that I am safe. And this is not just for children, it's just showing how, and I've said it several times, but just literally how the brain chemistry is calming you down, that it's not just a bunch of baloney counting your breaths or just calming your mind down. Like, there are tactical techniques that are helping you process different things in different ways, in healthier ways, and, you know, and kind of gauge those reactions. And while I think a lot of us are, you know, past the point of our, you know, terrible twos and things like that, we still have a lot of things that, like you said, trigger us.
Are we?
Yeah, right. Well, are we? No. Halftime, no. You know what I mean? But it's funny, because it's like,
yeah.
I think it would be easy if you didn't have children to kind of like start yawning during this part of the podcast, but it's like, hey, listen, like there is so much to be learned about this. And until you can really understand, you know, the connectivity up here and oh gosh, it's fascinating. But I want to let you finish that last thought on this, because I'm clearly enthralled.
Yes, well, and even to your point about the deep breathing, that's suggesting to take deep breaths to a client also elicits quite the number of eye rolls. But you are right, there is brain chemistry to that as well. And when the exhalation is longer than the inhalation and it's done 6+ times, that actually endorphins get sent to the brain. And that is actually when a message gets sent to the prefrontal cortex of like, hey, you're not really getting chased by a saber-tooth tiger. Like,
Right.
You're safe, you're okay. And so there's science to that. This other part, so my colleague Michael Klinkner and I, we do the videos together, and we have developed this approach, VIR. So it's validate, investigate, and regulate. And this is something that we do with kids and teens as well. And so essentially, when you were saying when they are becoming dysregulated and what's going on and why does the meditation help, part of that is so starting with validating their experience. And so
right.
Let's say they're fighting, their brother just hit them and they come in. And so starting not with the redirection of why did you hit your brother or what was going on that happened, but validating the experience. Like, you're upset, you guys were fighting, leading into the investigation of it. Like, okay, what's going on? Where are these feelings coming from? And then the regulation of it. And so that's where this mindfulness and the meditation comes in, of helping them then problem solve and regulate to make sense of it. And so that whole approach also takes them back to the present moment.
I love that. Sorry, we have a little interruption. Yes, you may open that package.
Oh,
son.
Okay.
Apparently they're
Speaking
back
of
from
kids.
Yeah, exactly. I'm practicing patience, Liz. I'm practicing my deep breaths while
I love it. You're practicing not reacting to your stimulus. I like it.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. Okay, so and now I wanted to get a little bit into, because I know that obviously I don't have older children, but I know my sister and a lot of our listeners have older children and teens specifically that are dealing with a lot during this time. Not being able to see their friends and everything like that can be really just stress inducing for them. And what types of things are you working through with them on, like, I guess, meditation? Yes, but are there other things? Like, do you do these like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercises, or would you suggest other things?
Well, and so a big place of where we start with teens is going back to the validating, is that we are taking time to be present for our teens. That is one of the most important aspects that we can do. And we talk a lot about like not waiting for your teen to come seek you out through all this. A lot of parents think, well, if my teen isn't bringing it up, then they must not be that bothered by it. And that's just simply not the case.
Okay.
Yeah, because they could be very bothered and maybe they just don't know what to do, or they're a teen, so they're isolating. So we encourage for parents to go seek out their teen and then to be present for them. Validate their experiences. Like, this is so hard. This is so confusing. This is so heartbreaking. And then normalizing their experiences for them. And so with a teen, it's a whole lot more about being present and processing than it really is. Some teens will engage in the mindfulness activities with you. And I do usually give my teens meditation as the exercise, as an activity to do. The odds of them doing it, don't hold your breath.
I know.
But you being available to process.
Well, and it's funny because, I think my nieces have a peripheral view of kind of what I do, but I almost never try to like, so do you meditate? Because it's kind of like, you still have this rep to protect. And I'm very much like the cool aunt. So I'm just like, I'm not pressing anything on you that you don't want to talk about. But I am like, it's nice to hear just that being present, because I'm very much of the person who's like, hey, how's it going with your friends? Are you guys connecting through FaceTime? Are you finding some other way to connect? And I think especially lately, where the younger age groups are kind of responsible for some of the spreading of COVID. It's just like, I think they feel like their hands are tied. Like, I can't do anything right. Like, I'm dealing with all these emotions. I'm not being responsible apparently. And it's just like, I remember being overwhelmed as a teen with my own insecurities. I can't imagine what it would feel like to have like the pressures of, having to carry this in like online learning and everything. And I guess, because I know that you work a lot with self-esteem, how specifically do you work with that in teens? I'd love to know. And I'd love to get my hands like more on and get them more invested in their mindset, but like I'm too scared. Like I'm kind of like hands off, like I'll wait until you're maybe mature enough to understand what's good for you. But how do you kind of navigate that for them in the now at the age that they are?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because teens, that's a lot of what we work with teens on is self-esteem. That's male or female. That is so much of what it comes back to. A lot of social anxiety, and then a lot of stuff, confidence and self-esteem. And we do focus on mindset. And so processing through situations and really challenging perspective. That is something that I do with my teens a lot. Hearing them out and validating what their experience was, because if they don't feel heard, they're shut off. That's it.
Yeah.
Like, they have to feel heard. They have to feel understood. And so listening to their experience and validating that, and then adding I wonder if, and really kind of challenging the perspective. I also do a lot of work with them on like what is within their control and what is not, which it can be really powerful for a teen, because it becomes really easy to focus on feeling so powerless and feeling like they don't have a say, they don't have a voice. And so doing a lot of work on what they do have control over can be really beneficial for the self-esteem, because when a teen feels empowered, what comes along with that is feeling confident. And so we talk about, I write for actually a teen website, teenstrongaz.com. I do articles for them monthly on the experiences of what teens are experiencing through COVID. But then also like the most recent one I just did was on comparison, because that's huge as well and messes with self-esteem.
And not just with
and
teens.
So bringing up those topics and oh yes, good point. That is exactly right. But just processing through it can be really powerful to know that they're heard, they're understood, and they're not alone.
I love that. And I think that that's really beneficial. And listen, I realize that we've kind of like gone way into the therapy side, but mostly that's because it's been one of those things that has always mystified me. I think we had this conversation before. I grew up in a pretty small town where those types of things weren't as readily available. Certainly, I think it's become a little bit more mainstream as well. I'm sure you would agree. Just the act of going to therapy, it's been more socially accepted. And I think it's really easy for even older generations to kind of talk about it as it's, not necessarily not real, but I would say that they view, psychology and even these mindset focused things, and they hold them in the same regard, like, oh, that's poppycock, or that's just, whatever. You got what you have a roof over your head. There's so much to be thankful for. And I think it's tricky sometimes to navigate that it's okay to want more. It's okay to want to be happier or feel safer within your own self. And I would love to know, because I know I ask this question a lot, like what, I know you meditate and everything, kind of tell us a little bit on how you really kind of tripped over to the more, I guess, esoteric side. I know you told me about how you were kind of using visualizing when you started up your own business, right?
Yes. Well, so in the story I had told you, Joanna, my close friend in the practice, when we had started the practice last year, and a lot of my clients had come with me from my previous practice. Mm-hmm. So I was feeling pretty confident and set, but she hadn't yet been in private practice. So we were building her caseload. And so we started, and so we had talked about The Alchemist is my top 5 all-time favorites. And so I probably had read that around that time. And however it came about, she and I started doing intention setting. And so she would come sit in my office on like Monday mornings, and we would look at her caseload and we would talk about, okay, what are we putting out in the universe today? Yeah. And every time it would happen. And then so if we 2 clients and it would happen and we'd be running in each other's offices, can you believe it? I know. And so that is just kind of where it started of you put it out there And I'm a big believer though, you don't put it out there and then go lay on the couch with your Cheetos. Like you put it out there and then you put in the work. And I am a big believer that what the mind believes it can achieve. And so whether you believe you can or you can't, like you are right.
You're
and
right.
that is my belief around intention setting.
And I love that. And I think it's so, I talked about it in a previous episode, the difference between setting intentions and setting goals, because I think sometimes goals can be a little scary. They're something that you may or may not feel connected to, like, okay, I want to make $1 million, next year or something like that. And I think it's easier and to be more connected if you're just setting an intention, even if it's like, hey, this week I'm intending to sit with myself, be still, meditate, something like that. I think that sometimes, and present company included, I get a little bit like wigged out and I'm like, oh shoot, what do I want for my career in the next 5 years? Like, I have no idea. I can tell you what I want to achieve next week. But I think I have a lot of anxiety just around those expectations for myself, even like, well, I guess I know what I'm capable of, judging from my past 5 years, but I don't know. I think it's easy to set, or easier for myself anyway, to set some intentions of how your way of being rather than who you are going to be in the next 5-10 years type of thing.
Well, and when you go back to the core beliefs, so many core beliefs already are setting us up for failure. And the belief of not being good enough, or the belief of believing your potential is way less than it actually is. And that's what I deal, like a lot of clients, I see them experiencing that of, I'm just like looking at this amazing human across from me and like all of this potential that they have, and they just don't believe it for themselves. And that really, in my mind, is such a game changer, because when you believe like, I could truly achieve anything I want, versus be nice to keep my job.
Yes.
What a vast difference.
And it kind of puts you on a whole different level of things to receive too. And it's like, I just, like I said, Liz, I have loved all of this, truth bombs and just all of this incredible education and knowledge that you've given us. And I know that I probably went way out of the scope of what we had kind of previously talked about, but I know that the listeners are going to just be like, oh my goodness. Okay. So one thing I wanted to say, like, obviously in your bio, I only touched on a little bit of, what you do. So how can people, I know that you are a professor, kind of tell us just a little bit about, the classes that you're teaching. My own niece graduated from the University of Arizona with a psychology degree. And so to me, I'm like, oh my gosh, she would have been, taking a class from someone like you, obviously a different school, but I mean, kind of tell us what types of things that you help these students with.
Yeah, so I teach at both graduate and undergraduate level, and I do trauma courses. I do the spirituality of aging. I do a capstone. So there's a handful of different courses that I do there, and then I did Psych 101 at one of our community colleges for a couple years as well, which honestly, like, that was my heart right there, Psych 101, and then doing it in person with these. So just imagine the things that you and I have talked about today and delivering that to these 19, 20-year-olds who most of them are truly sponges and they want to know. That was by far, and then COVID hit and that is what derailed that. They went to online. So, but yes, that is a lot of what I do, is all those different types of courses.
And so that's what I find the most fascinating, because clearly, I mean, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see like my jaw drop about 8 times, like, oh my gosh. And I just find this so fascinating. And so Liz, you also have a YouTube channel and your own podcast. Let's tell the listeners a little bit about how they can learn more about you and just find out more about, like, I know you mentioned a website, this teenstrongaz.com. Tell us a couple of places that we can find you.
So I do articles for them. So if any of your listeners have, it's specifically for teen girls, lots of good content on there. My website is evolvecounselingaz.com. And then my Instagram is at evolvecounselingaz, which is how you and I connected. I'm on there quite a bit, connecting with a lot of people. So if you want to connect, that's a great place to find me. And then also, my colleague and I do our YouTube and our, similar to yours, the YouTube and the podcast. It's the same content, just in 2 formats.
Awesome.
And we do a lot of what I talked about today with the parenting or the COVID, we do a lot on relationships, anxiety, depression. So we do a big mixture of different topics, and we put out a new one every week. And so that is Evolve Counseling and Behavioral Health Services is where you can find that.
Oh, awesome. Liz, thank you so much for taking time today to really, share your knowledge and kind of, like, for lack of a better term, kind of dumb it down for us so that we can really start to understand, the relationship between our mindset, our brain, and really the practices that we can adopt to improve our mental health as a whole. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad we've connected.
Me too. Well, thank you guys for listening. Again, we have just enjoyed an amazing episode with Dr. Elizabeth Fedrick. And you can check her out on her Instagram. We will link all of those things in the show notes for you. Thanks for listening. And as always, we will see you every Friday for a brand new episode of Hustle versus Flow.